Okay, we're recording. So, welcome everybody to the Masters of Destiny reiteration and re-recording of session one. So, for those of you who were not aware, we actually did this live with a wonderful group of people. Only for me to find out at the end of it that I hadn't actually hit the record button. So welcome to iteration two. I'm sure it'll be slightly different to the first recording that we did. So I hope you're going to enjoy this just as much. Thanks for the feedback from all of you so far. Okay, first of all, this particular session is pretty content rich. So it means that we're going to be laying the foundation for the future modules, the future sessions that we're going to share together. And it's really imperative in respect of achieving and understanding for the program, for the rest of the material that's going to follow. So it helps us to lay the foundation. This first slide, as you see the background image that I chose, I just absolutely loved it. I found it on a NASA website, is the NASA free images, and it's actually a depiction of the universe. It's not the axis of the Milky Way galaxy, it's actually a depiction of the universe itself. So I felt that this was very appropriate as the background for the work that we are doing, bearing in mind we are really expanding our perspective into a universal construct and into that universal domain. So this is an expression that I absolutely love and find it to be exceptionally meaningful, and that is one of the focal aspects of the work that we're doing is to gain understanding of the 9 waves of consciousness, of what is actually fueling and driving the changes taking place within us biologically and in other ways. But this quote is, to really understand something is to be liberated from it. And that comes from a documentary called The Four Horsemen. And just by the way, I would highly recommend that documentary for anybody who is interested in understanding some of the dynamics of what is going on in our current economic situation, in our current world, how we came to be in the situation that we're in with the political, economic, financial dynamics that we are being subjected to. Very interesting. But the quote I found very meaningful because understanding is a consequence of gaining knowledge together with direct experience, hence that little bit at the bottom. Knowledge plus experience begets understanding. And that in itself leads to what we may term holistic intelligence. And this is vital because where we're going from a perspective of the evolution of humanity is what is required of us, is to lead with the heart, but to not leave our mind behind. So the acquisition of knowledge is vital in order to maintain an established link, to be able to think critically in respect of information that is presented to us, to marry that with our experience so that we become holistically intelligent. So it's not just a case of, sort of leaving your brain at the door, leaving your mind at the door. It's about engaging your mind together with your heart in all that you do. And that in itself leads to wisdom and understanding. And in a sense, this liberation that's being spoken about is really, take for instance the whole thing about karma. To understand what karma is to be liberated from the impact of karma, which we can't be unless we actually know what it is and how it's impacting our lives. So to understand anything that's impacting our lives puts us in a position with the knowledge that we have to be able to make different choices, and hence to fuel our own freedom and liberation from whatever constraints may have been imposed upon us. So you might like to think about that quote. To really understand something is to be liberated from it, and perhaps look at areas of your life where perhaps understanding is required at a deeper level, and what sort of things you may require liberation from. So that's why I used it. It's a very expansive quote, and it really gets you to think, because this is also about thinking. It's not only about being in the world, it's about understanding your way of being in the world relative to what the world actually wishes to impose upon you, and knowing your position and your strength and your inner wisdom. So let's just a quick overview of what we're going to be covering in this particular session. We're going to have a look at the cosmic tree and the tree of destiny. We're really expanding our perspective to the totality of universe and evolution, how we came to be where we are at now, and what is this mystical tree of destiny, because it is something that has actually been provided or gifted to us throughout all of the mythologies of the ancient world. All of the indigenous peoples, what we may term the First Nation peoples, they all speak about creation myths, and this image of a world tree, a cosmic tree, is at the heart of so many of those ancient teachings. So there's a massive amount of symbology. There is also a lot of new cosmology, which is indicating that this tree concept actually is something that is now being verified scientifically. So it's really saying to us that the ancient peoples had a cosmological understanding and had insights that we are only just beginning to rediscover. We're bringing it out of the realm of myth into a world of reality, into a new understanding. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the number 9 as a sacred number, because essentially as we work through this program, we're building up to what we call the 9th wave, which is a wave of completion. It is a wave of energy that brings us information, that enables us to manifest humanity's destiny from an evolutionary perspective as a consequence of the gifts that this 9th wave brings. And again, the sacred number 9, or the number 9, we see present throughout all cultures, present throughout a lot of different religious and spiritual practices, a deep understanding of what 9 actually refers to as a number of completion. So we're going to have a look at that and where we find it throughout the world. We're going to look at a very brief overview of the 9 waves of creation. What are they? Why are they significant? Why do we need to know about them? Links back to the Mayan calendrical systems, their prophecies and others' prophecies, and the 9th wave. Cosmic blueprints, your biology and evolution, and how that ties in with everything, and how we're going to carry that forward. Accessing what we might call the spirals of time, more about that obviously when we get to it. Creation versus being created, and what the universe wants for you. And that's an interesting concept, especially where many of the New Age teachings speak about creation almost in an isolationist personal sense, that we create our own universe. There is no relevance actually given to the fact and to the perspective that even as we are creating, we are engaged in a feedback loop whereby the universe is actually creating us as a consequence of the information that is being delivered, the energies that we're being subjected to. So creation versus being created, it's not an either or, it's an and process, both and. And then we're going to have a look at my definition of ascension, ascension defined through the 9 waves, and what that really means. And it sort of really broadens our perspective of what the ascension process is. So we'll have a look at that a little bit further on as well. So there you have an overview of what we're going to be covering. Are there any questions at the moment? Nope. Okie doke. Right, let's press on. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so this slide I've actually put up because the concepts of fate and destiny, one may look at the whole concept of the 9 waves and consider it to be a fate-based issue or aspect or influence. In other words, we can't change it. It's something that is happening at a cosmic level. However, there are subtle differences between these concepts of fate and destiny. They're often used as interchangeable terms, however, they're not directly interchangeable. So this is just a little summary. Fate refers to a predetermined course of events that is inevitable. So in a sense, we are fated to be subjected to the influences of these particular waves emanating from the center of the universe. Destiny then refers to a predetermined course of events that can be shaped by an individual as a consequence of our awareness and our choices. So fate is believed to be inevitable and cannot be changed, whereas destiny can be changed by an individual. A little bit more on that after the third one. Fate is often associated with negative connotations, and that's how we often hear it used. And tends to give rise to pessimistic views. There's nothing I can do about it because it was fated to happen. Destiny is not associated with negative connotations and gives rise to optimistic views. Why is that? Because destiny actually connects us in with our potential to act and behave from any particular moments, from any point of choice in respect of what we are then going to feed back into this universal matrix, how we actually shape our life. It is fate delivers, if you like, the information that we can work with. Destiny is our potential to realize the highest outcome in respect of our utilization of that information that's being provided. So destiny speaks about fulfillment of potential as a consequence of what is being provided, which may be considered fate. Does that make sense?
So if
We got a question here.
fate is that I end up in a particular relationship, destiny is how I meet that relationship and deal with that relationship.
Absolutely. Okay. So we got a question here which just said if fate determines, if fate is how I actually end up in or that I end up in a specific relationship, destiny is then determined by how I react and respond within that relationship, because we can either grow from it or we can allow it to pull us down. So we can allow it to help to drive our potential as a consequence of those events. So in that context, these 9 waves of creation are predetermined. This is the universe actually delivering successive holograms, successive waves of information to us as a human race. Our destiny is how we then act upon that information and the circumstances that are actually received. And in that context, it's really interesting to look back at your life and to recognize that in order for you to be where you are at this moment in time, your life could not have been any other way. Whatever pathways have actually been chosen were indeed perfect. So it's finding the perfection in the imperfection, and being able to work with everything that's being presented to grow from it, to reach more of your potential as a consequence of that. That is your destiny. Okay. So here we are talking about masters of destiny. So we could actually say that we're talking about being masters of potential. And we're looking at this from a very big perspective in this slide, and we're going to start narrowing it down in respect of what has influenced humanity and how we can realize all of the potential in that. And as we go along as well, I'm obviously going to pull in some of the work of Vernon Wolf, who talks about highest potential and working with holograms and bioholograms, how these are stored in the physical body. And I'll be bringing in some of the work of a number of highly reputable, very, very well-known teachers as well, and practices that we can work with. So let's have a look at the birth of the universe and why this is important. And it's really interesting as well, because I did receive a question from one of our participants who actually said, if we are taught, and what is our recognition and understanding of time is that we live in the permanent now moment, that time itself does not exist. So if we're meant to live in the now, why is it important that we sort of go back to the beginning of the universe to understand all of this? And why is it important to have a calendrical system that essentially relates to aspects and functions of time? And that's a very good question, because my answer to that is that we are part of a continuum of life. We don't exist in isolation right now. In this present moment, we are a continuation of every human being that has ever lived before us, every action that's been taken, every decision, every choice point that everybody else has made along that continuum to this point. Our awareness of all of that, everything that has come along that continuum from the beginning of time, expands our ability to make choices in this now moment, and that affects the future of what will be manifest on the continuum going forward from here. So to be in the now moment is to have almost 360-degree awareness. So to understand the cycles of time and what has influenced the development of humanity up to this point, including the cataclysms and the traumas, the paradigms, the systems that we have become programmed with and locked into, to understand all of that in this moment gives us the ability to make different choices moving forward, and to be able to realize and recognize the potentials as outcomes of those choices more effectively and more astutely and with greater clarity. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. Question, yeah?
So even if we said that time was a concept, the now remains a continuum.
Yes.
So even if it's not a calendar, the now remains a continuum, whether you believe in past and future or not.
Yes. So that was a very interesting question again, and that is, so whether or not we believe in a calendar of time or cycles of time or whatever, is that the now remains a continuum. So the now moment is the point of choice. But the point of choice is dependent upon the 360-degree awareness of the continuum that is actually driving and fueling those choices. So thank you for that question and the perspective. So I hope that makes sense for you guys. So that's why, and one of the reasons why it's really important for me, that supports our understanding in respect of moving forward, that we have this foundation, that we are able to draw from that continuum in order to fuel our choices in respect of potential outcomes from this point forward. Okay, so we look at the birth of the universe. And how many people really sit down and think about that? Because we've been programmed with this whole concept that the universe appeared in an instant, in a moment, with this big bang, this explosion from the void, from the nothingness, this big explosion, and it's continued expanding. The word is isotropically, which is the same in all directions since that initial explosion. What's been found out now through recent scientific exploration, which ties into the 9 waves and the Mayan system of understanding and this whole idea of trees, is a new theory of the birth of the universe, which is quite fascinating, is that the emergence of the cosmic tree of life came first, and that the universe expanded out on a system of coordinates that actually gives structure to the universe. Not only does it give structure, they have identified an axis in the universe. Hence that background image. You can see in that background image there is an axis of light that runs across the center of the image. There is an axis, a central axis within the universe, on the opposite sides of which they find inherent polarity. So the universe itself is polarized right from the very beginning, from its birth. And by that inherent polarity, some of the things that have been identified are things like galaxies rotating in different directions of spin. So if you've got a clockwise rotating galaxy on the right-hand side of this axis of the universe, the other side will have a left-hand spin. They have also found differences in temperature. Not huge, but present enough to be measured and identified. So one side of the universe is actually warmer than the other. There's a couple of degrees difference in respect of those temperatures that have been actually measured. And the new physics of understanding led to a whole lot of calculations, and this image that you see here is a computer simulation of the birth of the universe. And this has really astounded some people, because what you see as a consequence of this simulation is what looks like a tree emerging out of the void. And from that, all of these, the galaxies and the birth of stars moving in very organized ways according to the coordinates that have been determined by this tree that's emerging at the center of the universe. Now, what happens, and what you'll see in a moment, is that the structure of the universe, and of course I think you guys probably know where I'm going to go with this, when you look at the coordinates of the tree, you not only have the central axis, you also have coordinates going out in one direction, so backwards and forwards, and side by side. And what do you get with those coordinates? You get the diamond. It's the diamond of the unseen at the very center of the life of the universe. Those were the original coordinates of the tree of life. Now, it is so startling in respect of the understanding of this original tree, for want of a better description, that it's been called in the literature, and you can Google this, and the axis of evil, because it actually challenges every single paradigm in respect of the birth of the universe. It challenges the holy cow or the holy grail of the Big Bang Theory, because it says that's not how the universe was actually birthed. The universe was birthed in a completely different way to what was originally thought. So it's an evil because it challenges those hard and fast paradigms and beliefs that the scientific community have bought into. But we know from the realms of science, they used to think that the Earth was the center of the universe, and that the sun revolved around the Earth instead of the Earth revolving around the sun, and that was a big thing when it was challenged, certainly with many of the within many of the religious structures that we know. So every now and again comes along a paradigm busting concept in respect of new findings, which challenges the old, and that's really what's happening now. So we do have a structure to the universe which is linked, the beauty of the diamond, the octahedron, and that, sort of the diamond as the source, or the octahedron as the source of the coordinate system for all of life, has been brought through by a number of different people. Not that many, however, there are, and there's an author by the name of Douglas Vogt, if any of you actually want to, sort of look that up at any stage. Douglas Vogt actually wrote a book called Multidimensional Reality, in which he asserts that the octahedron is the creator's die-hold. So it is the mold or the blueprint upon which everything else was actually, or from which everything else was created. So it's the unseen octahedron that provides the coordinate system for the very source of the universe itself. So here we get another validation. So the cosmic axis, here's another image which depicts this. The tree of life, which we may think of, and it's been used, as I say, very mythologically. Think about the Kabbalistic system and the tree of life. Think about, some of the reverence that almost all indigenous cultures have around this whole issue of trees. The tree of life is not merely an axis, but it is the source of space in all three dimensions. In other words, it is a perfect geometry. Those words come from Carl Johan Cullerman, the author of The Nine Waves of Creation, the book that I'll show you in a moment. So a perfect geometry, we know that perfect geometry to be the octahedron. And in this second image here is a distribution of temperature, a heat-based distribution, which identifies the axis and the crust if you like, sort of two of the coordinates in 2 dimensions and reveals it perfectly in respect of that modeling. So here you see the cross, you're only looking at 2 dimensions here. You actually have a 3rd dimension sort of forwards and back, which you can't see in this image. But essentially, you think about indigenous peoples and their concept of the medicine wheel in this image. And it's just, they knew the indigenous peoples were tapped into something that actually gave them insights into the very fundamentals of the universe itself and how we are but a fractal manifestation of the creative essence of the universe. So again, we look at that from perhaps a different perspective. So there's that with the cross. And also think about also the cross in the circle is one of the universal symbols that is multicultural and found etched into the rock walls of cave paintings, cave drawings, and so on and so forth. It's one of the primordial symbols that ancient peoples actually related to that is still used today. Okay, so this other picture at the top here is where you also see the distribution of the temperatures depicted slightly differently. So I've spoken about this inherent polarity, which is built into the very universe itself. So with the concept of polarity as well, we can perhaps begin to understand that in respect of so-called transcending polarity, our job, our task is not to elevate ourselves above it so that we ignore polarities, but to embrace all polarities is to actually embrace the totality of the universe. We can only transcend through embracing them. We cannot ignore the polarities that exist, the very fundamental state of our being. Question?
So just back to the time thing. If there are polarities, we're going clockwise and anti-clockwise at the same time.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. So the question there was if there are polarities, then we are going clockwise and anti-clockwise at the same time. The answer to that is yes, absolutely. And in fact, if you take, and this is something that I've covered in previous webinars, those people who've been with the Diamond community for quite some time will have come across this before, is that if you take 2 counter-rotating spirals as conical spirals, 2 cones, and you overlap them, what emerges from that is the diamond as the octahedron. So yes, we are counter-rotating, both counter-rotating spirals. So one of the things that I just wanted to show you in this image, as it will come out a little bit later, is this curved line, which in this particular simulation represents the axis, the universal axis. And it is a sine curve, as you see. It's just a depiction of it. However, I want you to think about the yin-yang symbol and the polarities that exist on either side of the yin-yang symbol, and it also has this curved axis that moves between them. Not only that, but in the study of numbers and the symbology of numbers, that curve represents the number 9. And it's also a wave. Absolutely. Okay, so here's a link for you. At the bottom here, you might need to sort of write that down and Google it. This will actually take you to the page where these images were actually drawn from. It's a scientific paper, which will give you some more scientific background into this discovery of the axis of the universal tree of life. Okay, as the source of space in all 3 dimensions and the perfect geometry and the octahedral diamond dihold. Now, I actually love this. This is an image that comes from Carl Kalleman's book. He's reproduced it with permission from the Bolshoi cosmological simulations, which is an image of the cosmic tree. It's another way of actually depicting it. And you can clearly see the coordinate systems and the way that the stars and the galaxies branch out and are birthed from this central axis. One of the things that I found particularly interesting and relevant about this image is that the shape to me almost looks a bit like a human being with arms out extended. It could also look a bit like an angelic image, the way that we are used to perceiving angelic forms, but it's almost like the blueprint of the human being that exists at the very heart of the universe itself. And talking about heart, if you actually take a look at this very, very bright cluster sort of right here at the center, it almost looks as if it's in the position of the human heart. So it's a rather fascinating simulation of the birth of the universe. And the image of the cosmic tree. Now, one of the things that is also particularly interesting is that science has quite often diminished the placement of Earth in respect of the universe and the universal environment to a place, or relegated Earth to like a place in the universe which doesn't have any particular special relevance at all, you know. So Earth just happens to have formed accidentally, you know, in the place where it is. It's just a random set of circumstances which place the Earth and the Moon and everything else in their particular configurations. However, what has been established through this particular work is that Earth does indeed have a special position in the universe, and this has baffled scientists because Earth is aligned with the cosmic axis in such a way that it is conducive to the emergence of life on this planet. And that is a huge concept if you consider the size and the scope of the universe itself, to be able to understand that Earth, our little planet, our beautiful blue planet, is actually aligned with the cosmic axis in such a beautiful way that it's conducive to the emergence of life. And we know, for instance, that our sun, our local star, has an octahedral field. So here we've got this octahedral alignment again. The planet, as depicted by Jose Aguilas, who did a lot of work on the initial decoding of the Mayan calendrical system. Jose Aguilas also depicts the Earth with a huge diamond as part and parcel of its structure. And we know that the movements of Earth relative to the sun are such that throughout the period of the year and the 4 seasons, as the sun moves and casts its rays across the surface of the Earth, it actually traces out an octahedral pattern, a diamond pattern on the surface of the Earth. So here we see this fractal nature of this pattern extending now from the very heart of the universe itself down to our beingness. And then we, as individuals upon the surface of the planet, when we align our diamond fields, we become more attuned to this universal, the beauty of this universal diamond pattern. So it's not an accident, it's not something that's new, it is something that has actually been in existence since the birth of the universe itself. The diamond light is not new. Our ability to attune and align with it is more evident now. Okay. So here we have a couple of depictions of the world tree. This is often as it has been shown in a mythological sense, but the symbolism that's in it is just absolutely beautiful, because here you see water and fire, 2 opposing forces. We need water and we need the ignition spark with water in order to give birth to life. So you actually see these opposing forces in this symbolic image. masculine and feminine. You see the world tree giving birth to the animal kingdom. Look at all the animals that are actually nesting in the branches of the tree. So it's a wonderful symbolic understanding. Also, emanating from the center of this tree, which is pretty fascinating, we've got this dragon-like wave or structure, which feeds its energy into what we might term the underworld so that things can become more conscious. There's a huge level of symbolism in here. But the number 9 is also very often encoded into mythologies of the world tree, including what's known as Yggdrasil, and this is, again, a geometric configuration and depiction of the ancient Scandinavian shamans who refer to the world tree. They relate to the ash tree as the world tree, the physical manifestation of the ash tree upon the planet, as symbolic of the world tree. Quite fascinating. The ash tree actually has diamond shapes in its bark. So really interesting. There are other trees of life throughout the world that the indigenous cultures refer to as symbolic of giving life to their communities and cultures. But this is a particular depiction, the central one of Yggdrasil, the Nordic world tree, which carries certain runic symbols and meanings, energetic meanings. And there are 9 nodes depicted in the world tree. So we come back to this number 9 relating to the world tree and the 9 waves of consciousness. So we're going to go back to the Mayan system and the number 9, which is going to give us a little bit more insight, but there's a corroboration across cultures. So there are 1 or 2 things that I just want to talk about before moving on from this slide, and that is that each of these nodes in Yggdrasil, or the Scandinavian representation of the world tree, represents a particular world. Their indigenous belief system revolves around the manifestation of 9 worlds. Some of those belonging to what they would term the underworld, the polarity of the dark, some of those representing the higher worlds, but it represents the evolution, ultimately, of consciousness. And the 9th world, or the highest level, which would be up here at the top of the tree, represents our reunification with Source. So we start at the bottom with our birth from Source, with the lowest forms of consciousness. We work up through the tree, back to the highest level of consciousness, which is the 9th world. And this is interesting because there is a correlation between this mythology and the Mayan understanding through the 9 waves, which is what we're going to be working with. So there's that. Plus, of course, what you see here at the center, you see the coordinates of the diamond or the octahedron in the center of their depiction of the world tree. There is also something else I want to mention, and that is that Sean Caulfield, who is a South African, is particularly affiliated with the San Bushmen of the Kalahari. He maintains that based on DNA analysis, that the San Bushmen are the most ancient people still alive on the earth. Says that their DNA actually shows that they are the remnants, if you like, of one of the earliest and most ancient human forms upon the planet. So they hold the wisdom and the understanding of those early humans. And he talks a lot about the San Bushmen holding the codes and the pristine brilliance of the diamond light of creative Source. And that will make a little bit more sense when we get into looking at the 9 waves. So that is particularly fascinating because he's coming at this from a very different perspective and talking about the diamond light, whereas, you know, sort of we're examining this from a completely more expansive understanding, from a universal understanding of the diamond, and all of the work that we've done on understanding the diamond as a fractal pattern which emanates from source all the way down to the very biology of our being. And it is interesting, in fact, that this claim that the San Bushmen are the most ancient of peoples, because there's been some recent work done in Australia which is challenging that belief system in respect of the Australian Aboriginals. They are now saying that the Aboriginals were the first people. Well, when we get to understanding the process of evolution through the 9 waves, it'll make more sense that that awareness was seeded onto the planet, all over the planet at the same time. So in essence, we do have a number of ancient races that emerged across the planet all at the same time. So let's have a look at the number 9 as this relates to the 9 waves, ultimately. So the number 9 has been understood throughout virtually all ancient mythologies and cultures, and is embedded and encoded into so much of their history and so many of their stories. It is known and referred to as the number of completion, a perfected divine number, which is just beautiful, because when we think that now we're being influenced by what we might think of as the 9th wave, it is an opportunity to potentialize that aspect of divinity, of perfection. It is one who accomplishes divine will. The Freemasons referred to it, I found this very interesting doing this little bit of research, the eternal number of human immortality, which is humans becoming one with source, becoming gods, human immortality. In the biblical sense, we see the 9 choruses of angels. The Taoists refer to 9 nodes of the bamboo in respect of their teachings and expansion. Islam refers to the 9 openings of the man, which is the expansion in consciousness. Siberian tribes refer to 9 notches of the birch axis of the world, and here we get this reference back to trees, and the Siberians relate to the birch tree as symbolic of the world axis, or the cosmic tree, the world tree. In China and in Chinese mythology, it's linked to the dragon, and the dragon and the serpents are an aspect of those wave forms, which are emanations from the universal wave tree. So here we get this concept of dragons being brought in. 9 attributes of the dragon, 9 forms of dragon, different types of dragon. It's the number of the emperor, he who is the imperial leader or ruler. The 9th dragon is linked to heaven. So there you also see it through completely different culture. In Egypt, we have the Ennead and the 9 gods. In Greek, and in Greece and Greek mythology, we have the 9 muses. In Brahmanism, we have Vishnu incarnating in 9 avatars to sacrifice himself for man. Scandinavia, Yggdrasil, the world tree, and the 9 worlds, 9 levels of consciousness. General theme of 9 worlds, 9 waves of creation originating from the original tree of life. So truly a theme that runs through everything, so hugely significant. Here's another little image that was taken from Carl Kalleman's book, The 9 Waves of Yggdrasil, with its 9 worlds and 4 cosmic directions. And here perhaps gives you a little bit of a closer idea as to the coordinate system, which traces out that beautiful form of the octahedron. So you've got your axes in the very center of the world tree, geometrically precise. And if you link all of those together, you actually create the shape of the octahedron, and then below that you have your originating source, the source of all matter, and outside of that at the top you actually have your ultimate divine perfection and the highest world. So you can even see with the shading, you've got the lower forms and the lower levels of consciousness and the higher levels of consciousness, but essentially you're tracing out the coordinates of the world tree and of the octahedron. And this was just something, it's an image I've actually used before, and I thought it's really beautiful. It's a way in which you can bring together 8 individuals and create that beautiful octahedral shape. So I can imagine the energy that would be generated by coming together in community and engaging in a little bit of teamwork and creating this particular geometric form and honoring the source of that, or life, honoring the source of life that's within every single one of us, and creating the connection to that together. So that's still something that I'd love to do, getting a number of people together in a physical environment and to be able to create this and do some energetic work with that. Just a lovely concept. This is just a slide that I took from an earlier webinar that was done. Some of you would be familiar with this, some of you not. It's called, the webinar itself was called The Numbers of Love. And it essentially links the number 8, or infinity, our connection with the universe, how we understand the number 8, that potentiality, with the sacred numbers of 3, 6, and 9. And how that also relates to the yin-yang symbol here. So we have the number 3, which we can actually see etched into the infinity symbol, which is the divine blueprint, and it is the number that's often associated with creation. So it's birthing from the universe. 6 is the number which represents embodiment and form. So it's bringing that consciousness to life, living it and experiencing it through the embodiment of form. And then 9 is return to source. It's the reaching of the highest potential through form and embodiment to be able to realize the return and the perfection through that form and return back to source. And again, you know, the yin-yang, there's that sine curve which was represented by that other image of the cosmic universal tree of life, by the simulation image. And the 3 and the 9, the 3 and the 6. 3, the birthing out of darkness, and the 6, which is the birthing into light and manifestation, creation through an expression through light and consciousness. So yeah, that if you didn't actually experience the totality of that understanding, that webinar is well worth listening to. It's called The Numbers of Love. So there's a lot more that went into uncovering that. It's the notes that go through to create the divine musical scales, and so on. So there's a whole lot more to it. Links back to the solfeggio frequencies, what are known as the solfeggio frequencies, heck of a lot. So that's just another little bit. So here we now start to take a look at the 9, what we might think of as the 9 waves of creation, or 9 emanations from this universal tree, from this cosmic tree. So we start with the understanding that everything is created through waves or spirals of energy. Fundamental energy movement, the way that information and energy is shared in the universe, and that includes ourselves, is through spirals and waves of energy. In fact, what you see as a sine curve, as that wave-like emanation through those previous images, is just a 2-dimensional representation of a 3-dimensional spiral of energy. So the 9 waves of creation, the waves themselves are pulses of energy emanating from the cosmic axis, from the axis of that tree, from the diamond at the heart of creation. So the Mayan cosmology and that particular calendrical system when it was decoded, identifies these 9 waves as build-ups and emanations of consciousness in the process of realization from the very birth of the universe itself. So it's the lowest form of initiation of creation through molecular and atomic structures, through to the formation of life, plants, animals, etc., through to the highest form of consciousness, which is our potential now to recognize and realize the divine in our very being. So these 9 waves are pulses of energy emanating from the cosmic axis. Now, that's perhaps decoded from what we may perceive as a mythology. However, what has been observed in the universal sense is indeed, and this I take from some of David Wilcock's research and his work, is that there are, quote, waves or ripples of energy from the center of our galaxy. And when these waves hit a star, the star's light output changes on a quantum level. So the star's light output increases. It's given a burst or a stimulus of energy that increases the output of light from that star. These have been measured and visibly witnessed, these pulses, as they actually move through our galaxy. So it's kind of tying the mythologies and this understanding of waves or ripples throughout the universe into things that are beginning to be observed scientifically. So it becomes quite mind-blowing. If we think, this quote, this statement here, each wave carries specific holograms of information dependent upon its frequency. It takes us back to an original equation, which is energy in motion, that each wave carries information about the purpose of the wave depending on the frequency of the wave. So energy is information, and we decode it on the basis of our own operating system and what we are programmed with, if you like, in respect of decoding it. So some people will be resonating with specific waves and specific types of information depending upon their frequency, their level of awareness, and they match with the frequency of specific waves. And this will make a little bit more sense in a moment. Wave interference, think about ripples on a pond. Now we're talking universal level. You chuck a stone into a pond, you actually create ripples. If you chuck another stone into the pond, you create an interference pattern as a new set of rippling waves is actually created. So you get a phase turbulence where those waves intersect and interact with each other until a new level of harmonization is actually established. So in that transition zone between one wave and the next wave, you find periods of turbulence. And this is very interesting from a world perspective, from a planetary perspective, and from our own personal perspective, because the receiving of these waves upon our particular planet causes turbulence and chaos in these transition zones, and we are in a transition zone at the moment. And we can trace that back throughout history with the timing of these waves, which becomes really fascinating. So the cosmology of the 9 waves of evolution or of creation is based on an ancient Mayan understanding of the cycles, and I say of time, because in essence there is no time. However, there is an evolution of life perceived as this continuum that has taken place through these cycles of waves that have emanated from the universal source. Fascinatingly, all 9 waves are now operational since 2011. The 9th wave only became active, fully active upon the planet in March of 2011. So that, in effect, if you really look at what's been happening out there with a lot of the channel messages, with a lot of people in this consciousness field, that there were steps up in consciousness that began to take place. From 2011 and 2012, people were talking about ascension, talking about completion, talking about, sort of returning to divine source. There were more and more and more people connecting in to the elements and aspects of this wave. So there have been shifts taking place. A lot of talk about new earth. It's different languaging, but a lot of talk about human beings having the capacity to be able to reach more of their potential as a consequence of things that were happening. There is a misunderstanding in respect of some of the interpretations of the Mayan calendar that predicted the Mayan calendar ending in 2012, because going back to Carl's work with the waves, the ninth wave actually landed, which is the completion of the cycles in 2011, and we now continue moving along with the ninth wave and embedding it upon the planet. That's really what our task is at the moment. So 2012 was just a marker in time. It was just a window. 2011 was a real biggie in respect of the energy hitting us. Each wave in the cycle of the 9 waves has a frequency which is 20 times higher than the wave that preceded it. So each one brings a higher consciousness, a higher level of information that actually fuels evolution and development of life. The current time of fulfillment of human destiny has been prophesied by all ancient cultures, bringing with it an awareness and an awakening and warning of the challenges that are actually inherent in this process. So it's not all fluffy love and light and ride off on your unicorns. It's actually there are challenges that face us in respect of the embodiment and the fulfillment of the potential of human destiny in accordance with these times. And if we look at the timing of certainly the 8th wave and the 9th wave, it becomes evident why so many souls actually chose to be here on earth at this time, to experience this living evolutionary cycle that is actually taking place. But it's also fascinating then how that timing correlates with so many of the prophecies of the ancient cultures. And we're talking ancient African cultures, we're talking the South American cultures, the ancient shamans, we're talking Native American cultures, the prophecies of white buffalo calf woman, which said, when the white buffalo calf is born again, this will herald the start of a whole new cycle for man. And the white buffalo calf, I think, was born in 1997. And when we start looking at the waves, you'll see that 1997 was part of the pre-wave of the 8th wave, which was responsible and brought with it the holograms and the paradigms for a massive shift and a massive awakening in accordance with the 8th wave. The 9th wave is taking us to a whole new level. And also that period around 97 and 98, there was a massive awakening that took place. Many people experienced rapid awakening and insights in those particular years. Question?
That are still in wave 1, wave 2?
Good question. Yes. So the question is, are all 9 waves still operational? And in other words, there will be people who will be resonating and being activated by the earlier waves, like wave 4, 5, 6. Yes, the answer is yes. And that is the challenge, because we are aware of and we are beginning to embody and hold the holograms of the 9th wave. So our job is to bring that potentiality into being, to make it easier for others to access those higher frequencies of the waves. So yes, there are entire cultures still operating on the informational constructs of the lower waves. So they haven't managed to evolve yet. So yeah. There's a very, very powerful link between this calendrical understanding of these cycles and what we have observed and have been able to observe in respect of these massive awakenings and things that are taking place upon the planet. So the more we connect with and embed the holograms of the ninth wave, and that is ultimately what we're going to build up to through the journey of these sessions, the stronger the signal becomes in the field for access by the collective and by others. That's our job. It's the unity wave. It's what some people would call, the unity wave of New Earth. Outcomes. The outcomes are dependent upon our alignment with cosmic law and natural law. And that means very often then replacing, as far as possible, and working with natural law as the guiding force and the guidelines for our life, as opposed to man-made laws, which have become the prevailing paradigm. And those man-made laws align with the earlier waves, certainly the sixth and the seventh waves, is where they emerged and what they align more strongly with. So it's going to be really, really important for us to bring forward that alignment with cosmic natural law. So here's just an image of the book for those of you that may not have it, may not have seen it. It is highly recommended as a sort of companion to this program. There's a lot of information in it. It's not always that easy to read because the initial 2 chapters, there's a lot of loaded science taking you through this discovery of the tree at the center of creation and the cosmic tree. But if you get beyond that, it becomes absolutely fascinating in respect of what Carl Johan Calleman has actually unpacked through this work. It's truly a brilliant piece of work. I think he's an amazing human being for bringing this through, for being able to decode it. And just by the way, Carl Calleman is actually a doctorate. He's a biologist. A natural scientist, and he worked in the fields of natural biology for many years. So he has the ability to think critically as well as to look beyond the obvious and to ask the questions. So this information really just affirms, if you like, what I mentioned on the previous slide. The one thing that I actually just want to say, and you'll see this in a subsequent slide, is that each wave, so the first wave, second wave, third wave of creation, has a day in respect of the way that the wave moves. So you might want to think about the upward movement of the curve as being the day, and then the downward movement of the wave as actually being the night. And they have particular durations in time. And during the day and the night, different energies and different impacts are prevalent. And this becomes really interesting and powerful for monitoring and tracking your alignment with the ninth wave. When the wave is actually on the upward movement and it's in the day phase of its expression, it represents outward, creational, evolving, action-orientated energies. When it's in the night, it is more internal, reflective, and destructive. So again, and just by destructive, it's also healing, because destructive is about breaking down everything that does not serve our alignment with that particular paradigm. And it's left brain, right brain. It's again the polarities that are inherent within each of the waves. So we learn to work with both because we are ultimately light and dark, and our own axis in alignment with the cosmic tree is that pillar of light that runs through your being down the center of your own diamond and your own diamond field. So the wave that we are most in resonance with impacts the reality that is being created. So right now we live in a consensual reality that is largely governed by the sixth and seventh waves. And we will talk more about that in subsequent sessions when we get to explore some of the holograms and patterning of those waves, because I think it's important for us to understand as individuals, because all of the waves are operational at this moment in time. They all run through us as well as part of the continuum of life. So at any moment in time, depending upon our level of consciousness, our level of awareness, we might find ourselves bumping up against or needing to adjust some of the holographic patterning of the earlier waves that we have inherited through our biology and through that continuum. And that is why it's really important to be able to understand the totality of these cycles and the system, if you like, because they will impact on our responses in any given moment. So let's have a brief overview of the 9 waves. Now, this is taken, it's a reference from Carl's book. And don't worry so much about the terminology here, because this is how it was all recalculated back to the Gregorian calendar. These were the descriptions that were given by the Maya. These are their time units, and these are their time durations. When they are linked back to our physical time and our Gregorian calendar as we understand it, we can begin to see and establish some of the patterns that those waves represent. So the first wave that emanated from the world tree was the wave that gave rise to matter itself. So we're talking atoms and the ability of those atoms to join together and link together and form molecules. These are the atoms that were birthed and born in the explosions of stars as the stars were being born from the original axis of the universal tree. The actual activation of this wave took place 16.5 billion years ago. So these scales of time are absolutely incredible. The duration of that wave, the physical duration of that wave, is 1.26 billion years. So what that means is that every 1.26 billion years, that wave will go into another aspect of its cycle, a day or a night of its particular cycle and unit of time. So when this is in its day cycle, we would have and find the capacity for matter to be recreated, for instance, perhaps new matter to be created as a consequence of that upward movement. And then during the nighttime cycle of that, which is the destructive internal reflective force, that there is a breakdown of matter in the material world. So the second wave was initiated or activated 820 million years ago. That gave rise to and carried the information for creation of plants and animals. And if we go back in the fossil records, we actually see, and we can see around these timeframes, the emergence of plants, trees, and the plant kingdom within the time frame that is indicated by this system and the emanation of this wave, which is really quite fascinating. And that has a duration or a time cycle of 63 million years. That's interesting because I'm going to show you something on the next slide in respect of cycles of evolution. So that changes its direction every 63 million years, the wave itself. The third wave gave rise to the primates, who carried the DNA and the capacity for a higher level of consciousness, which was an aspect of the DNA that was used in the creation of human beings. So the Darwinian theory of evolution, that we evolved, just from apes, is perhaps not the right one, but the primate material, the genetic material, is the source of human genetic DNA material. There is more than likely, and this has been postulated by many, many sources, that there were advanced races, extraterrestrial races, who were able to take that primate DNA, tinker with it, and that they were responsible and had a huge role to play in the evolution of the human form as we know him at the moment. So the primates came about 41 million years ago, and that wavelength is 3.1 million years. Human beings emerged more than 2 million years ago. that particular wave has a cycle, an evolutionary cycle of 158,000 years. The fifth wave represents culture, and that is an understanding of community. This is where human beings actually started to move from nomadic small family groups into slightly larger communities and started establishing cultures and larger living populations. Also, that in respect of this culture became an understanding of the relationship with divine source, because it's in this time period and in this evolutionary cycle that aligns with this wave that we begin to see the emergence of the cave paintings and the drawings and the behaviors like burying of the dead, which seem to indicate an understanding of life beyond the material and the physical world. So that's what we mean there by the emergence of culture, beliefs and practices that were common to slightly larger groups of people. The sixth wave emerged about 5,000 years ago. It was 3000 BC. That has a cycle of just 394 years. So every 394 years, you go through a day and a night of the sixth wave. And that has been responsible for higher civilizations. When we start looking at the tracking of this wave, we begin to notice that this cycle represents really powerfully the concept of religion. It's where higher civilizations, higher forms of thought, the structuring of civilizations actually took place, where you see cities emerging. If you think about the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Romans and all of those ancient civilizations in those few thousand years BC. So here you see actual much, much larger, sort of cities and people communicating and being organized hierarchically within certain structures. And civilizations, it was the birth of not necessarily imperialism, but certainly rulership, sun worship, the birth of many religions. Along that scale. And then we see the seventh wave activated in 1755. Bear in mind, I must just say this, that these dates are given, however, prior to the actual implementation of that wave and that information, there are influences in respect of a pre-wave. So it's like the leading edge, the front edge of the wave begins to impact some people before others, and some can actually tune into it before the full wave effect, before the full wave lands. So this is the date that was given, but we would start seeing this earlier than 1755. However, what's interesting about this one is that seventh wave has a cycle of 19.7 years. So that's relatively short, and that represents technology. So what's particularly interesting is that in the 1700s is when we saw the birthing of the Industrial Revolution, massive explosion in respect of technology and the mechanical world. That we now see ourselves in, changes in building methods, factories being built, and that caused a reorganization again of society as a consequence of technology. That's where the slave mentality actually came in and became really, really prominent as well through this technological advancement and the structuring of society to enable and facilitate that. So every 20 years or so, when it hits the up cycle of that wave, you actually see huge advances in technology, sort of new technologies actually coming forth. So that wave is having a very powerful influence at the moment. The eighth wave, as said, that actually landed in 1999. which is why in the 2 years prior to that, sort of 97, 98, we saw a huge awakening taking place. This was quite a high frequency wave. It represented the birthing of the digital revolution. So it's moving from analog to digital. So you now see technology merging with the digitalization as a consequence of this wave. What this wave also brought was it brought with it a huge opening of the right brain and this capacity to perceive of limitlessness, to reconnect with the universe. And this saw the birth, this was seeing the birthing of a lot of the New Age movement. This was when the New Age concepts and the New Age movement was really bursting forth in many, many ways. Even though we saw the precursors to this in the 1960s, we're really seeing a huge amount of this awakening in massive ways from the mid to late 90s. So that's the digital revolution. And this wave moves day and night every 360 days. So almost on an annual basis, there is a new form of thought. It's quite a high frequency wave. So this is shifting and moving. And in essence, I think it is said that in I think it is 2032, if I'm not mistaken, that the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th waves all move into a daytime cycle at the same time. Look, the 9th wave is pretty frequent anyway, but that is massive breakthrough opportunity and potential. So we are building up to that. So that's part and parcel of our destiny, is the embodiment of the 9th wave in sowing the seeds in readiness for this. It's almost going to be like a massive push forward for humanity when all of those waves align. We'll go into more detail with that further down, further along in the sessions when we start detailing these waves. So the 9th wave, as has been mentioned, was activated on March the 9th, 2011. It is the wave of unification. So it takes everything that has gone before it, brings it all into a cohesive picture in support of humanity reaching its full potentiality, and moves it forward in a positive way. So it unifies everything. It supports the bridging of the polarizations that have been evident up until now, and it supports the upliftment of humanity in some really powerful ways. That has a duration of just 18 days. So every 18 days you find the wave going into an up or a down cycle. And one of the reasons why I was drawn to actually start the program on the 25th of July is because that represents not only the day out of time in the Mayan system. So the day out of time is the bridge between the old galactic year and a new one. And just by the way, that on the 26th of July, we move into the year of the White Wizard, which is a year of alchemy. It is a year of creating. Many of you will probably sigh a huge note of relief at that, because we've been through an exceptionally challenging cleansing time. So it's a year to begin creating more and more magic. So yeah, every 18 days that moves up and it moves down. But the 25th of July this year was also day one of the upward day cycle of the 9th wave. So it means we're moving into an 18-day period of being able to drive things and move things forward, initiate new things, bearing in mind the unification. So that's just an overview of the 9 waves. They are essentially 9 waves of creation and evolution. Each one brings with it the information and the holograms to recreate life and society and humanity and all of life, really, with a different agenda. Now, why I actually said, I'm just going to go back to the one, that this number was particularly interesting with the second wave and these cycles. I said that that was really interesting was because many years ago, I actually came across this information about the cycles of extinction and biodiversity. From a biological and scientific perspective, evolution does not take place on a gradual basis, which is what the Darwinian theory proposes. Instead, what has been found in the fossil records is that life emerges spontaneously somehow over certain periods of time, and then these extinction periods happen within cycles of time, and they've observed this in the fossil records. So this particular chart ties in so well with this eighth wave that we were talking about, because there we see a cycle of 63 million years in respect of the up and the down aspects of the wave. So what this says is that every 62 million years, new life emerges and old life falls away. So you have these extinction cycles and appearance of new life cycles without any in-between phases. Just suddenly, it's like instantaneous in cosmic terms evolution. So take, for instance, with dinosaurs. One of the dinosaurs that flying dinosaur, for instance, that actually had its wings, the dinosaurs all disappeared. But when the dinosaurs disappeared, we suddenly saw the emergence of birds with feathers. The only thing that remained which linked them in some way back to their reptilian cousins are the scales on their legs. But otherwise, and the beaks, I think you could actually see some of them with beaks and residual teeth, for instance. However, there's no gradual evolutionary form between those flying pterodactyls and the birds that actually emerged afterwards. The dinosaurs disappeared, and the birds as a new species of the evolutionary tree emerged. And the same it is with all of these particular cycles of time that you find. So this ties in beautifully with the 63 million year cycle of the eighth wave. There is also a 26 million year evolutionary extinction cycle. That 26 million year cycle comes within this one. But it's the same principle of sudden appearance of species and sudden extinction of species. So if these take place almost in those transition periods between waves, which is what we are seeing now, it is highly likely then that we are seeing massive extinctions, which is happening, and emergence of new species at the same time. And that is not spoken about in the media. However, it has been discovered by scientists that new species of flora and fauna, species in the polar regions, are being found and identified on a regular basis. So there is an actual evolutionary emergence happening at this moment in time, as well as an extinction. And if we trace back as well, let me just go back to this one. Human life, this cycle here, which is approximately 8,000 years, if we start tracing back the shifts and the changes in culture, we can tie this back to other cycles as well. This has a cycle length of approximately 8,000 years. 3 of those cycles gives us 25,000 years. The precessionary cycle of the equinoxes is 26,000 years, and that has been linked definitively also back in the records with massive and distinct cultural changes in man on the planet. So it's particularly interesting and relevant to see how these cycles align with what we know and have observed through the fossil records. So it's I present this and give this to you because it gives us some means of validating the understanding of the Maya, of the ancient peoples, in respect of what drives and fuels changes in life upon the planet. These emanations of creation from the cosmic world tree and the timing of them creates massive shifts and changes, and that is happening right now. Okay. Here's an image that was taken from Carl Kalaman, which is relationships to life, created by different polarities of the human mind. And each wave causes or creates a different polarity within the human mind, which governs the relationships that are then experienced with self and with others. And we start here with the fifth wave because that is really where man and his relationship to his world started changing through culture. So what we see with the fifth wave is what we call primal unity consciousness. Here we see an open circle, which means no polarization. So hence it's a unity consciousness that is not polarized. It is light, therefore it is aware and open to receiving. So it's a very open time. And within this time period of the fifth wave is fascinating because this is the time period in which we see all of the indigenous cultures expressing their creation stories and mythologies. So they were connected with something way beyond our capacity to understand. Our capacity to understand those creation stories, what they were connected with, what they understood, is only coming to light again now in the ninth wave. Here again you see this opening without filters. So the indigenous peoples held their stories. They had no filters. They talk about being connected with the galactics, with the star peoples, with, sort of with the universe, the understanding of creation. It's like they knew because they were able to access something that humanity has not been able to again up until now. And they have kept those mythologies and stories alive for us. That is the value that they bring to our society, and we relegate them to the realms of primitive. So sad. The sixth wave, so that was the fifth wave. The sixth wave brought with it the imperial relationships. Those relationships, sort of the master-slave, royalty, monarchy, etc., that came along with the sixth wave. And here you actually see that the sixth wave has a left brain that is alive and alight and active, and a right brain that is dark. So the focus in this particular case was actually left-brained patriarchal, and there we see this patriarchal concept of imperial hierarchical relationships, as opposed to this understanding here and the unity consciousness and the ability to connect with the divine feminine. So here the connection with the feminine was lost. And we know that we can trace back to original matriarchal cultures. So this gives us some indication. We know when those patriarchal cultures sort of came into play. Seventh wave saw darkened unity consciousness, as it's called. And that the relationship that man had during this period was a socially based approach to life, which was coming together in communities for a common purpose, but highly structured, connected more with the mechanical, less with the divine. It was like that understanding and connection with the divine disappeared completely during the seventh wave. The eighth wave is a self-authored approach to life. which is a whole focus on the self, not necessarily in relation to the universe. So it's like the I create my own reality crowd, which we see running through the so many of the New Age teachings, which became prominent during, as a consequence of, they are still prominent, but specifically related to the eighth wave dynamics. So it's a self-authored approach to life. You create your own reality. You are responsible for everything, so on and so, and it's all, and it was the emergence of the I, you know, the I can be whatever I want, I can do whatever I want, so on and so forth. So the ninth wave instead brings with it a new unfiltered clarity, which provides us with a self-transforming approach to life, which gives us the capacity and the understanding to transform, not only transform ourselves, self-transformation, it brings with it the understanding of internal alchemy, our relationship to the universe in respect of that, but also the capacity to transform our environment, transform our societies, transform our relationships with all of life as a consequence of our reunification and relationship put into context with the universe. So there's a whole dynamic and an evolution of relationship that actually takes place. Bear in mind that all of these waves are still active. So many people who have been able to tap into the primal unity consciousness of the indigenous peoples will quite probably find it easier. And there you can actually draw the link forward from the fifth wave to the ninth wave in respect of this expansiveness of understanding. I mean, right now, man is poised to travel among the stars, to go and meet the star people. From a developmental technological perspective, which was not possible here, although there was that understanding. So it's two different levels of understanding and relationship to unity consciousness. So yeah, question.
What does that do to man's capacity for self-harm of our race? Moving through the consciousness, does it mean that violence will cease?
Okay, so question is, what does this do to man's capacity for self-harm in respect of the evolution through these levels of consciousness? That self-harming aspect comes about as a consequence of the endarkened aspects. So where the feminine nurturing aspect has been endarkened with the sixth wave, and the totality of the endarkened consciousness with the seventh wave, where that became patriarchal, it's almost a detachment from emotions. So that has given and awoken within man the capacity for harm, because those indigenous fifth wave peoples understood they didn't, that one, they lived in accordance with natural law, and harming was not. That came in during the sixth wave, the earlier sixth wave. Yeah. As we move more deeply into the ninth wave, we'll actually see a reduction, a transformation of that capacity for violence, understanding the need for the masculine energy to support the feminine as opposed to opposing and suppressing it, and thereby reducing the capacity for violence. But again, it's really interesting, that question, because understanding these ripples in the pond and these periods of transition and turbulence, it's during the periods of turbulence and confusion, which we see now, which has increased that capacity for violence in respective relationships. So very good question. Okay. So bear in mind that this is a two-dimensional depiction of waves. In reality, they are spirals. This just gives you some indication of the differences in frequency between one wave and the next. So you see the fifth wave and you see the extent of one cycle of the wave, and the sixth wave coming in, which has 20 times the frequency of the preceding wave. So as you go up, you start higher and higher and higher frequencies, which also means you get more and more and more. The higher the frequency, the more information that wave actually holds and brings in. So the capacity for complexity and for being able to, what's the word, synthesize complexity is actually being increased all the time. And the intensity of that experience, yeah, the intensity of the experience is actually increasing. So we do have a lot of, I think, internal emotional turmoil and some really deep traumatic shifting that is going on as we move into the ninth wave. So it's about reconciling everything that has happened on that continuum through the previous waves, through those holograms, because we're still a part of it. We live in a consensual reality. Those waves are still running through us. So our challenge is to continue enhancing our capacity to attune to the ninth wave. But we would still have the fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. They're always operational. It's just how we transform and transmute and realize the potentiality of each of those previous waves. It's like we could not get to where we're at unless we had actually gone through those cycles. So here's, and I've sent this link out to you guys, the ninth wave calculator. So it's really, really useful to keep your eye on it. This is the 25th of July. And here you actually see this is the 18-day cycle of the day period of the wave, the ascending period of the wave. And then this is the 18-day descending period of the wave. So every 18 days we go through this. So 25th, we start with day 1 of the 86th day of the ninth wave. And that means it has been, the wave has gone through 86 cycles since it became active upon the planet in 2011. That's what that means. Each of those cycles is referred to as a day of the wave. So that's how they kind of track the duration of the wave. So it's day 1 of the 86th day. The whole cycle is a day of the wave. It's day 1 of the 86th cycle of the wave. So we're in a period of initiation, action, moving things forward, enlightenment, clarity, awareness. And then in 18 days' time, we move into that downward cycle. So it's a rather rapid cycle, which is why I think some people perceive it as being chaotic. So it's like, yeah, it's twice a month almost. So I hope that's making sense all in respect of giving you some understanding of the cycling of the waves. We'll go into a little bit more detail in respect of the positioning and the qualities as we go through the program. Let's have a look at the spirals of time. And this is drawn from some of the work of Nassim Haramein and some of the research by Russian scientists, which is really quite fascinating, but it parallels and it dovetails into the understanding of the 9 waves as well. And I just love this image on the left-hand side. This is what's called the Rose Galaxy. And to me, it's just a beautiful image, but it's that amazing spiraling feature, the natural occurrence, the natural spiraling of galaxies and events in our universe and the physicality. Now, this second image is actually a depiction of the way that our solar system, guided by our sun, actually moves through the galaxy. So we've been taught to a large extent, think about what's taught in schools in respect of our solar system, that is that we have this flat plane and the sun is in the middle and all the planets just orbit around our sun. Okay, but in essence, what is happening is that the sun is moving through space at 3,000 miles per second. So as it does, it drags the planets behind it. You can actually get some idea here with this was a still image that was drawn from, taken from an animation of this movement. So you can see here's a planet and here's a planet and here's a planet on this spiral. So the planets themselves actually spiral around the sun as they're being dragged along. So effectively, what happens is that the movement even of the sun and the planets creates a spiral or a vortex as it moves. And there was a question as well from one of our participants in respect of which direction the sun is moving in. Well, according to scientists, NASA scientists, and those who are monitoring it, it's moving in the direction of the Scorpius constellation. So that is, as they call it, the nose of the movement, the nose of the sun. And that's what's happening. So in effect, we are moving through space at an incredible pace behind and revolving around, dragged in the field of the sun. What that really means from a cosmic perspective, if you like, is that we and our planet and our sun are never in the same place. We never, as we orbit around our sun, come back to the same point. We are moving into different locations in space as everything is moving. So in essence, you know, and this is really interesting because it's actually been said that we are hitting a region of space. Now, some call it the photon belt. It's a bit of a misnomer, but it's quite possibly the only language that they could find to perhaps identify and understand the energetics of what they were perceiving by certain channels. But essentially, we've hit a region of space during this movement as well, where there is a high density cloud of stellar material, which is highly electromagnetic, which means there is a lot of energy in that area of space that we are moving through at the moment. So to a large degree, this is influencing the electromagnetics and the high intensity of what is happening on our planet. It's an indication of that movement. So a lot of electromagnetic activity, so a lot more energy in the form of photons of light. Question, yes. Yeah, a question about climate change. This is one of the reasons why climate change and what we are experiencing is not wholly anthropomorphic, meaning not wholly man-made. It cannot be. The Earth's magnetic shields are weakening at the same time as we are subjected to a greater intensity of cosmic activity and cosmic radiation. At the same time, our sun is in a solar minimum, which means it is not as active as it normally is. And when the sun is active in respect of solar flares and coronal mass ejections, that to some extent helps to buffer the receiving of cosmic radiation. That is absent, so we are receiving an influx of cosmic rays. That's a scientific fact, part and parcel of the movement through space. So yes, and turbulence. Yes, yeah, absolutely. And turbulence. It's this turbulence of the transition zone as part and parcel of these waves of consciousness. Absolutely. So it doesn't absolve us of the fact that we are required to be guardians of and stewards of the earth. which is absolutely a fact. So we have this coupled with these massive extinction events, which are being attributed to climate change, but it's part and parcel of this transition in respect of the waves of creation, because new life, including ourselves, is being evolved in physical embodiment. We are witnessing an incredible moment in the history of our planet. Quite literally, we are. So, bearing in mind that this movement is actually taking place, as we travel on the Earth, our DNA is transmitting or embedding information into the field. Now, this is, again, it's validated work that our DNA emits photons. It is a receiver and transmitter of energy. It is a blueprint, and what it does is determined by the energetics of the environment. So we can speak to our DNA and we can actually get it to change what it does as a consequence of the energetic relationship that we actually have with it. So as we travel, as we experience things and life on the planet, our DNA is emitting information and photons of light and embedding those into the spirals of time as we travel along in space. So this is what we may consider the spirals of time. But it's not only us that does this, because if you trace those spirals back, you will find, or you travel the pathway of Earth, and in essence, the pathway of humanity back along these spirals, you will find all the information that was embedded technically by everybody that has ever lived upon the planet. So that information exists along those spirals. And it's really quite fascinating, because we have perhaps to some extent negated the impact of our ancestors and of the ancestral relationships with life and with the planet, because we're busy moving forward all of the time. However, whatever they have experienced, whatever their relationships were, has become embedded into the space-time continuum. So if we want to focus ourselves on upgrading humans to reach their highest potential, we need to also upgrade the information that has been embedded in the field that still belongs to the previous consciousness waves. So I've got a question, yeah, which so I've been asked just to go back a couple of slides. Which one? Okay, so let's just go back a few slides. That one.
So the spiral is, if you were to take it literally, it's not only up, it's down.
Yep.
Fifth wave and ninth wave almost hold the.
So the fifth wave and the ninth wave hold the potential, the holograms, the relationship with source. Yeah. Yeah.
So in terms of the spiral then, are we traveling upwards and as literal?
Okay, so the upwards and downwards movements of the spiral. So inwards and outwards, you might want to think of it in a separate way. Okay, so we are tracing massive spirals through space, so we are emitting into those cosmic spirals. We are also created by spirals at the same time. So we've got inward moving spirals of information and outward moving spirals as we travel or journey through space.
Like all of those different pieces of information from the different places in the spiral.
Yeah.
Somehow converge.
Yes. Yeah, so there's the comment here is that ultimately all of the different pieces of information on the spiral actually somehow converge, and they do. They converge back to the central axis ultimately, because that is what has fueled the output of the waves. So we are busy through our own alignment with our internal axis, drawing that reconfigured information back into the axis so that we come into total alignment with the cosmic axis. And all of the learnings from this expansion and creation of the universe. So it's like we are the universe experiencing itself and bringing that information and insight back. Does that make sense? It's a fractal pattern. So we change one aspect of the fractal through our own beingness, and that changes the universal fractal. Yeah. Thanks. No, it's great having these questions. So I hope you guys understand that. And some of this understanding is drawn from an experiment that was done by a Russian scientist by the name of Piskaryev, which is understanding this, what they call the phantom effect, and that DNA leaves an imprint on the structure of space-time. And we find also that DNA is a universal blueprint. So we are constructed of the very blueprint that actually creates, ultimately, galaxies and life forms everywhere else. It's the same blueprint. It's just the rearrangement of the atoms and the molecules within that blueprint and the information it receives that determines what is output in respect of the expression of life. Now, this particular experiment about DNA leaving an imprint, it's called the phantom DNA effect, and you can Google that along with Peter Garriev, and you'll find the information. But essentially, it was an experiment that has been done many times over, and that is that a strand of DNA was isolated within a protected container that had nothing else in it. So it was only this DNA. And that DNA was then hit with a low intensity, coherent light form, laser light. Okay, so that laser light excited the DNA and actually caused it to emit photons. What they actually found then, and photons contain information, they are energy, they are light, is the DNA was taken out of the container. So there was technically nothing left in there. That shadow, or the light form, the imprint of that DNA in the form of photons and light molecules, stayed in that container for 30 days after the experiment. So, and this has been repeated a number of times. So it's called the phantom DNA. So it was just a light form, a blueprint of the DNA in light. So it gave an indication of the actual ability for DNA to leave its imprint, to deposit that information in respect of what it's actually been holding and what it's been carrying. So this finding the fact that the information that our DNA holds has been embedded within the spirals of time in the continuum by everyone that's ever lived. Yeah. So the galaxy is expanding because the consciousness and the understanding is expanding. So we are part of a gigantic feedback system. We're not only receiving information, we are depositing information into not just the planetary collective field, but into the galactic universal field all the time. And that information is being shared because the fractal organizing pattern that shares information throughout the universal fields is an octahedral diamond grid. The diamond grid actually is the mechanism by which information is transferred and shared. Fractal pattern. So, cosmic blueprints. So we talk about cosmic blueprints. Your DNA is a cosmic blueprint. And this is where it actually becomes really interesting, because so many of those in the New Age fields and the new spirituality boxes, schools of thought, talk very often about restoring 12-strand DNA, restoring 24-strand DNA, 144-strand DNA, this strand DNA, and blah, 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 blah. The blueprint that exists at the galactic and cosmic levels is 2 strands of DNA. And effectively, when we understand that that is the blueprint, that DNA, through sheer just rearrangement of its components, can express something completely different. It can express a new life form, just through rearrangement and addition of 1 or 2 molecules. You don't need extra strands. And here you actually have, this is an artist depiction of our DNA strand, of the DNA form. This is just another artistic impression which takes you from the level of human being all the way up to source, planetary, and beyond into cosmic. DNA. And of course, what you see is interconnected waves or spirals. So again, we come back to that wave spiral relationship in respect of the cosmos. And then in this image, this is an actual image of what is called the DNA galaxy. So you'll see that here you have a galaxy that looks like an intertwined DNA strand. So if you just take a look at this, you can actually see the fundamental form of the 2-strand double helix DNA. And in fact, again, scientific experiments have shown that if you take a plasma environment, so that's a highly charged, energetic environment, of plasma, which is almost in a fluid-like state, and you chuck dust into it, because that's what exists in the universe, you chuck dust in, it automatically forms this double helix spiral. It's like it's the fundamental blueprint of the universe. So you don't need 10, 20, 50 million strands of DNA. You're just dealing with embedding and releasing different types of information through the structuring of the double-stranded helix, which is your cosmic blueprint. It's capable of doing absolutely anything, and there's a lot more that I will talk about in subsequent sessions in respect of the amazing capabilities of DNA, but this just really gives you a perspective and an understanding of that cosmic blueprint. The other thing that is really fascinating, and it takes me back to the origin of the diamond work, is that one of the things that I was told 15 years ago, and it's just as this work has unfolded, it's become more meaningful at different and higher levels, is that the diamond is an emanation from the DNA. And it took me a long time to understand this. However, it's not just an emanation from DNA, also arises from the diamond matrix, because that is what generates the opposing wave-like spirals that creates this double helical form. But if you had to actually take this, each crossover, and you looked at this in 3 dimensions in crystallography, you will find that in each one of these crossover points between the rotations of the DNA, you find a diamond or an octahedron. So you get structures of these interconnected octahedra. You essentially generate this double helix form. It's the unseen diamond that guides the formation of life. So by working with your own diamond and generating and strengthening that alignment, you strengthen your ability to communicate with your DNA. Not only that, but you strengthen your capacity and ability to align with the universal flow of information, which is what I've said for years. And this just really takes, hopefully, the understanding to a whole new level. So here we go with definitions of ascension. And I just did a little bit of mooching around on the internet to find a couple of definitions, and I couldn't disagree with some of them, because I thought, yeah, these are more meaningful. The literal definition of the word ascension means the act of ascending or ascent, to be risen up or to climb. Now, essentially, that's what we are doing. We are rising up in frequency to meet the conditions and the potentials of the 9th wave. That is our ascension journey. Ascension is a conscious choice to engage in evolution. Absolutely. It is the journey or process of becoming more conscious and for your ever expanding choices. Ascension is the path of those who are choosing to consciously step into a higher level of light, higher level of information, frequencies. It's a personal choice to boldly step into the unknown, because that's really where we're at. We're on the verge of something unknown in respect of what humanity has gone through, in order to expand into an experience that is entirely new. So it's being unafraid of the unknown. Ascension, in its basic spiritual or mystical sense, can be thought of as the highest state of man. It is the expansion of awareness. An individual is ascending in the sense that something of a lower vibration is being raised up or becoming higher in vibration. So now you go back and you look at the 9 waves and you recognize perhaps that each time we go through an adjustment to an advancing wave of consciousness throughout the history of humanity, it is an ascension, because each wave is of a higher frequency than the one before. So each one has risen us up and taken us up, ascended us to the next one. So for me, what's really important is that ascension is not a destination, and it's not something that we will necessarily realize in our lifetime, because to actualize the potentials of the 9th wave is going to take us eons to do as a human race. That's not in a blinding flash of light. It is a higher frequency, so that potential is coming at us at a higher and higher frequency rate. So it is a shorter effective time period that we have in respect of realizing this, but the potentialities of filtering that out so that humanity is able to connect with that are huge. The challenges are huge. So here's my definition of ascension. It is the alignment and integration of all levels of our being into a unified whole, our true essence, which is the purest reflection of the source of all creation. It is an expanded awareness, an inner alchemical process of transmutation, because we are transmuting all of the misappropriated aspects and information of the previous waves. It is acceptance, an embracing of duality, and an ability to attune to higher frequency, and we could say more complex information. It is a journey, not a destination. Because so often with the application, I think, of the word ascension, we tend to think of it as a culmination, as a destination that we are aiming for. And instead, what it is it's a journey into the potentiality. The initiation of each of the 9 waves represents a step change on the ascension journey. We are now adjusting to and attuning to the unified consciousness of the 9th wave, the wave of completion, to bring this consciousness into being and to live this through our embodiment. Ultimately, ascension is the return to pristine diamond consciousness. And that ultimately is love, and that's love beyond our current capacity to understand. We are evolving our innate understanding of what that love actually is, and the acceptance of the totality of this creative journey. It is our destiny. So I hope that makes a lot of sense for you. And bearing all of that in mind in everything I've said, here's a question for you. Are you the creator of your own universe? And there's a bit of a paradox here, because to some extent, we create the outcomes of situations that we find ourselves in by consequence of the choices. But those choices are dictated to and are fed by the resonance of the wave and the information in the wave that we're attuned to. So we are being created by the universe, even as we are creating. So it is a dual feedback loop. And we live within a consensual reality that is co-created by everybody else. We only know ourselves through the mirrors of other people and through those relationships. So we create even as they create, and we measure the effects of that creation by the feedback that we get from other people and the choices. So in the spirituality box, we get this: you are the creator of your own universe, where when we begin to understand the enormity of what is facing us and the cosmic perspectives on creation, we can perhaps adjust our understanding and the picture that actually goes along with this. So I leave that with you, because that might challenge some of your preconceived ideas and begin to break down some of the barriers and the filters. So what I have here is a recommended follow-up for practice from this first session. Now, I'm not calling it homework. I'm not calling it play work. I'm not saying you have to do it. It is a recommendation, because the ultimate essence of this program is about sovereignty and empowerment and you realizing your potential. So this is a recommendation and a suggestion. You can choose to or you can choose not to. It's entirely up to you. So the first thing that I would suggest you do: the physical trees upon this planet stand as symbolic representations of the great cosmic tree. That is why all of the original indigenous people have incredible relationships with trees. Those of the fifth wave that had the unfiltered ability to connect all understood that trees played a vital role in reflect of a central component of their culture. In the African cultures, they refer to trees as standing people. They all have, trees as representations. So find a tree that you particularly resonate with and commit to spending just 5 minutes a day with it. Connect with the tree in whichever way feels right for you. Acknowledge the tree as a blueprint of the universe and ask to be aligned with the cosmic tree through the trunk or through the essence of the tree that you have chosen. Now, when I say connect with it in whichever way feels right for you, I have, sort of done exercises where you place your forehead or your third eye upon the tree and sort of connect with the essence that's actually moving through the trunk of the tree, or you can sit with your back against the tree, you can hug the tree, just talk to it, sit and look at it, connect with the essence, whatever works for you. So in whichever way feels right, just do that. Simply be aware of the energy of any information, signals, feelings, and emotions. And make a note. Keep a journal and just see what you connect with. And then the second thing is connect with your own personal spirals of time. So think about it, because your spirals, your DNA spirals, would actually connect you back by following that journey back to your parents' spirals, your mother's, your father's. From that, those spirals then intermingle and begin to connect back to the greater spirals that form part of the ancestral collective. And further and further and further back, because all of the information has been deposited in these spirals from the very beginning of time. And Nassim Haramein, quite interestingly enough, this was quite a fascinating correlation for me, he says, oh, and by the way, those spirals actually come in at your back. In the center of your back, more or less in the region of the heart. And I just had to smile, because in my work with the diamond and in working with ancestral clearing and healing, I open the grids at the back of the diamond, and that's how I connect into the ancestral energies and what steps forward. And sort of following the spirals back through the grids has become quite fascinating in respect of doing that. So there you have it. That came from him. So you might want to envisage that you connect in and you travel backwards, if you like, on those spirals from the back of you. Let your consciousness travel through your DNA back to connect with your mother's or father's spiral, and then further back as far as you are able to go. You may like to set an initial question as you do this, sort of what is it that you perhaps need to be aware of right now, what is ready for transmutation, and just observe what information you have access to. If you are given guidance, if you are given a process to follow, trust it and follow it. This is about you connecting with your own source and trusting the information and the insights that you receive through this journey. This is part of your sovereignty and part of your mastery. And traveling back along those spirals of time, back into your parents, back into your father's spiral, will automatically begin to connect you with the various waves of creation. So you may just find a particular hologram, a particular image that jumps out at you that's been stored on that spiral. Just follow it, just observe, just ask what it is that you need to know, that this is sitting in respect of your connection with the spirals of time, and it's what you have tuned into. Ask what it needs. If it needs anything, we're going to do some more work with the bioholograms in future sessions in respect of homing in on these particular spirals of time linked in with the waves. So I hope that makes sense for you. That's it. I'm going to leave you with that, and thank you so much for sharing this time, for being with us in this space, for the questions, for the mutual group support, and I'm just thrilled that you are taking this journey with me. Altogether, I know that there's going to be some amazing revelations, and I wish you a week of aha moments and enhanced understanding as we continue this journey on. I look forward to connecting with you for the next session. So from me, my thanks and gratitude for your presence and for your love and for your trust. So God bless and have a good week. Bye.